If you didn't know it by now, I love chainsaws and I have a ton of them, and this is my 7th chainsaw. This is DeWalt's latest brushless DC chainsaw. This is a 60 volt unit. You can see it right there on the side, and it uses their 20 and 60 volt flexvolt batteries. You can see right there. This particular one is a 9 amp hour battery that I have in this one. This is the model number DCCS670. The reason I bought that chainsaw is because I also have DeWalt's diminutive 12-inch chainsaw. This is a DCCS670. This is the first electric chainsaw I have ever owned. And honestly, I had very low expectations when I bought this. The only real reason I got this was because there was an Amazon.com offer, and I had bought other battery-powered DeWalt tools, and it said, hey, do you want to get one of these guys for about 120 bucks? And I said, I can't turn up a $120 chainsaw, even if it is an absolutely ridiculously tiny bar right there. But I have to say that this guy was an awful lot more useful than I ever expected it to be. Of course, let's keep things real. This is a 12-inch chainsaw. This has a 20-volt battery on the back of it. The batteries that I've been primarily using with this are these 6 amp hour FlexVolt batteries, and that means I can use the same FlexVolt battery in this saw and in the 16-inch saw. When plugged into this tool, it operates at 20 volts. When plugged into the other one, it operates at 60 volts. Obviously, a 12-inch saw is not going to be doing a lot of felling work, but this is an excellent saw to keep in your trunk during the winter. I live out here in the woods. Oftentimes there's a tree down on the private road that I have to drive along. It's over a mile long. And generally speaking, what ends up in the road is a limb from a big tree or one of the spindly trees that grows up in the thicket that you see right there behind me. So it's something that this 12-inch saw could tackle before you end up completely draining the battery. So this has been an awful lot handier than I thought, but there are definitely some drawbacks. Now, that's why I decided to try out this 16-volt saw. This also was an Amazon special. You can see that we have a 60-inch bar right there. I just put a brand new chain on it for this episode, but you can see that the bulk of this design is very similar to the 12-inch saw. And let's take a deeper dive into that right now. Some of the things that I really love about this design, you can tell that DeWalt is skilled at making handy, practical tools because we don't need a scrunch for this. So if you want to access the chain and the bar, you just pull that little toggle, unscrew it, lid comes off right there. We have easy access to the chain and the bar. You'll notice that the chain tensioning mechanism is not part of the cover. It's part of the body of the saw itself. It's this really handy knob right there. Again, no scrunch, no screwdriver required to tension the chain. And as we see in other electric saws out there, there is no chain brake mechanism in the cover. It's internal to the saw, actuated by that lever right there. There's also an inertia brake feature, of course. Now let's talk about the downsides. The first downside I noticed was we don't have a metal chain catch. You can see instead it's part of this plastic cover. You can see where the plastic cover has been chewed up a little bit by the chain right there. Now if the chain becomes a little bit too loose, as can happen, or if it falls off or if it breaks, then the chain catch is what keeps it from hitting your leg. Hopefully you're wearing chainsaw chaps to help prevent that, of course, but if it does come off, you want something to catch it. And in a saw like this Husqvarna saw, even though this is also a battery-powered one, you can see we have a metal chain catch right there, not a plastic one. And chain catches do get used even if you're very careful with the saw. This one ended up catching a chain just once. The other thing I have to complain about is the bar retention mechanism. I had hoped that this saw would be a little bit different than my 12-inch saw, which I'm going to pull over here for comparison. And you can see that in a nice touch, there's a high commonality of components. So this cover is the same on the 12-inch saw and the 16-inch saw. That is a really great feature because, again, this is something that I really loved about my 12-inch saw. But something that has been a problem on the 12-inch saw is if I take this cover off, you can see that we have a lot of worn plastic right here. You can see the chain's been definitely digging in there. And if we take a look at this little bar right here, the mechanism that retains the bar in the saw is plastic there at the back. It has a little metal post up front, but it's plastic out the back. We also don't have metal teeth here on the face of the saw. Now that's not too much of a problem for a 12-inch saw, but for the 16-inch saw where you might be doing something a bit more aggressive, and that DeWalt 60-volt saw does have the battery power and the motor power to do that. See the log grips or bar grips, people call this a number of different things right there. That's used so it can help dig into the wood to help you really crank down on the log as you're cutting. Instead, the DeWalt has plastic right there, as you can see, and those just don't grip into a tree as you're trying to cut it. Now, The big thing with this plastic retention mechanism for the bar here is that if you're especially undercutting on a tree, it seems that it really starts to wear out. And you can see that's what was going on with the 12-volt saw. When you're undercutting, the bar is going to be torqued this way. It's going to wear the top of that mechanism out there. And part of that is due to the fact that these covers are a single nut cover right there. And because of the way that they tighten down, they don't get quite as tight as a scrunch device. Even if you wanted to crank them down tighter, you couldn't, because as you can see there, it ends up stopping before it becomes too tight. Now, that does end up leading to the wear of that component, but it is an awful lot more convenient than this battery-powered Husqvarna saw, where this has two things that I dislike. It has a standard scrunch, so you do have to carry a scrunch around in your back. It doesn't have two bolts, so it has that similar problem of this loosening over time, but you can crank it down harder. And the tensioning mechanism is in the cover of the saw itself. So there are definitely pros and cons. But the biggest pro for the DeWalt saw is the overall price tag, because this Husqvarna saw, there will be a complete video on it. This guy was about $1,400 all in for the options that I ended up getting. This guy right here I got on sale. It was $220, so pretty darn cheap. Not really that much more than the 12-inch saw. That means that you can buy a ton of bars, you can buy a ton of replacement parts. And then the big thing here is the battery, because it came with one battery. The Husqvarna saw does not come with a battery. And if you hunt around, you can get two of these 9 amp hour batteries from DeWalt for about 220 bucks. So for about $440, you could have 3 of these batteries, you could have one chainsaw, and it comes with the charger. And it's worth noting that even though some of these components wear out, fortunately, they are easily replaceable. So if we take a look at this 12-inch saw, for instance, you can again really see the wear going on there. You can see the damage to that section right there. But this entire plastic plate can be replaced very easily. I found them online for $7, and so I'm just going to go ahead and replace these regularly on the 12-inch saw and just keep this little guy going, because it does an excellent job at what I use it for. Again, it's important to keep realistic capabilities in mind. This is not the kind of saw that you're going to want to use if you have 30, 40 trees to fell. You could do it eventually if you had the batteries around, of course, but the definite use case for this is if you live somewhere like I do, you want to have a saw in your trunk, but you don't want gasoline or two-stroke oil. You don't want to have to deal with carburetor maintenance, etc. And of course, the commonality of battery components. If you have DeWalt batteries, then this is going to be an excellent saw to use. And if you're in construction, that makes an awful lot of sense, because you may have 20, 60 volt batteries hanging around already. You probably have the charging infrastructure if you're a DeWalt kind of shop. And if you need a chainsaw for cutting beams, that sort of thing, you can definitely do that with this chainsaw. And of course, you could put a longer bar if you really wanted to. This kind of chainsaw is going to struggle through that long term, but if you wanted an 18-inch or a 20-inch bar to cut bigger beams on a job site, and you were patient with the saw, this is the kind of thing that could get that done. And you aren't going to be cutting that many beams on average, so this is kind of something that the battery should be able to tackle. Let's see how well it performs. Right here I have approximately a 10-inch diameter oak log. It is a fresh oak log. I just cut it down a few days ago, not using this saw, using a slightly bigger saw. But it's pretty consistent all the way along, so let's do incredibly thin slices and see how many we can get. And now we have reached the end of the battery. That wasn't as many cuts as some people thought it might. Of course, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we'll call that 6. And this is almost 7 full cuts of this log. But the big deal here is that you'll notice this battery is pretty warm. Now, I don't consider this a fail at all, because this saw is pretty aggressive in its cutting. You can see that I was definitely cranking pretty hard on the saw there. That's because this 16-inch saw has the ability to do that. This is significantly more powerful than the DeWalt 12-inch saw. Now, this particular saw has a high efficiency chain. You can see it is pretty darn narrow, and this chain type also seems to wander a little bit on logs. That's not unique to this DeWalt saw, and overall, I give this a pretty high mark, I have to say, because it's pretty torquey, it's very easy to use. This is the kind of one, again, you can have in your trunk, very easy to field service. That is a big deal for me because of the way that the chain tensioner is done there, the chain retention mechanism, etc. And again, the price tag. Even though these batteries can give up on you after a short while, you can see if I press the voltage button there, we have a single green light on this battery. That means it's essentially dead. The battery is pretty warm. We actually could get a bit more lifetime out of this if we let it rest, let it cool off. And again, for less than $500, I got this saw and 3 of these 9 amp hour batteries. So overall, I have to say this is a pretty good deal. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below. Let me know what else you'd like me to cover here at the Mountain Garden. Be sure and find us over at alexonautos.com, youtube.com/alexonautos, Instagram, Twitter, all those other social things. And if you haven't done so, be sure and hit that subscribe button down there at the bottom of your screen. I promise that we will be doing some more regular updates here on the channel. I'll see you all later.